Hello Steelers, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to go through the steps I took to paint these Warlord Games epic scale French Napoleonic figures. These are 15mm in scale, and I got them as part of the Bonaparte box set for black powder, but of course they can be used in any rule set of the period. I'll also put a list of all the paints that I used in the description down below with an affiliate link. But before we begin, let's talk about the epic scale figures. When you first open your starter box, it can be a bit daunting to get started. With numerous sprues of infantry and cavalry, it may be hard to know just even where to start. I would suggest taking one sprue at a time, paint everything on the sprue and then begin another one, even swapping to a cavalry sprue just to ensure you don't suffer from any burnout from painting endless blue coats and white trousers. So let's have a look at the sprues in detail now. You can see each sprue has enough figures to create an 80 figure battalion, but there are also a number of individual voltigeurs skirmishing, a single foot artillery gun and a commander. However, that is not all. The infantry strips are split into 4 different types. You have 3 strips of the basic infantry of the centre companies and a single strip of command. This latter has the leader, a drummer and a flag bearer included, so they are easy to spot. You also have the light companies and the grenadier companies, and you can tell these apart from the others for the plumes on their shakoes and the epaulets on their shoulders. There are 2 strips of each of these companies, and they have a specific place where they stood as part of the formed battalion. Grenadiers went on the right and the voltigeurs went on the left. Also, you'll note from some of the infantry strips are wearing their campaign greatcoats. This is going to add a little bit of variety later on. By 1815, the French army had been through a lot since the beginning of the Revolutionary Wars in 1792, which was then later to turn into the Napoleonic Wars, losing almost 2 million men for one vainglorious man's lust for glory. This was a huge percentage of the men available for conscription in 1815, and it showed. The army that invaded Belgium in June of that year was not the massive force that invaded Russia in 1812, nor was it the well-led and trained force that gave Napoleon his famous victories of the years past. Over the course of a few days, the army that marched into Belgium looking to split the Allies and force another victory for Napoleon was in tatters, falling back over the French border in disarray, the once mighty Imperial Guard soundly beaten. Talk about hubris. As for painting guides, there are innumerous books out there that deal with the uniforms of the Napoleonic Wars, but there is also a great free resource online that covers the 100 Days campaign specifically. This is the Saint-Georges website, and it covers every unit involved in the campaign in great detail. It is by no means infallible, and some people have pointed out some mistakes here and there, but overall this is a brilliant resource for painting your figures if you're taking your first dive into the Napoleonic Wars. I'll put a link to the website in the description down below. The majority of French units wore pretty similar uniforms, so I'm just picking a random line infantry unit to begin with as my subject for this video. To begin painting, I use matte white spray to give the figure strips a good coverage. I do this outside and ensure that the figures are fully covered in paint in an even manner. When the spray has dried, I go back over the figures with a medium brush and white paint just to cover any of the bits that I missed during the spraying. Once the white undercoat is dry, I take a strip off the sprue and I attach it to an old paint bottle with some blue tack. I then start painting the tunics of the men in Vallejo's and flat blue. I paint the arms and the backs of the tunics, around the backpacks and the other equipment. I do this quite roughly and quickly. Don't worry too much here about covering things at this stage, as I'm going to be repainting everything but the tunics later on anyway. Then I begin painting the men's greatcoats that are attached to the top of the backpacks in Vallejo's neutral grey. This is a very simple and a quick stage, but I ensure that I also get the paint to the edges of the rolls of the fabric. Using the grey, I then switch to the men actually wearing the greatcoats. As the army was assembled quickly and stores were not full, men would be issued mismatched greatcoats or even bring their own. So first I paint a few random men in grey overcoats. I then use dark sand to paint the other greatcoats that I left before. This gives the unit a nice ragtag campaign look and it adds a bit of interest to the uniforms. You could go mad here and paint other colours for the other coats, but I just stuck with grey and dark sand for the time being. The men in grey coats will have similar equipment to the men in tunics, so everything on here will apply to those as well. The flesh of the faces and the hands are then painted next using a basic skin tone. Again, this is by Vallejo. You'd think they'd have offered me a sponsorship for the amount of times I use Vallejo, but no, nothing, just silence. They never replied to my emails and phone calls, I can tell you, a restraining order is a difficult thing to live with. Oh, where was I? Oh yes, then I begin painting the shakos and boots in black. I also painted other bits like the ammo pouches and the scabbards where I can see them. Just make a note that some of the men are wearing the older style long boots while some have those shorter boots on. The wood of the muskets is painted next, and this is painted using Vallejo's beige brown. I just paint this carefully and then also paint the backpacks of the men, and being very careful paint the hair that you can just see under the shakos. Then using flat red, a small brush and holding my breath, I paint the collars and cuffs of the soldiers. Don't worry, if you make a mess here you can always go back with the blue and cover up any mistakes when the red has dried. Next up is painting the white. I will clean off any spillages from the other stages at this point and also begin painting the straps on the back of the backpack with the smallest brush that I have. This is quite simple but takes some time and patience. Once again, any mistakes here can be covered with a base colour if there's too much white. The French use colours of the pom-poms to designate the difference of the companies that the soldier belonged to. You can find various sources for this online, but in this case I just painted these ones to match the second company's colours using Vallejo's Prussian blue. Then I seem to have changed my mind and painted them in green for the first company. However, I continued to finish off the metal parts for the muskets and the bayonets using Vallejo's oily steel. I just ensured that the sides of the bayonets were also covered correctly. Then the base colours were pretty much done, so I painted the base in flat earth and just ensured that I didn't get too much paint on the boots. Once again, if I did, I just went back and I cut in again just with black just to tidy things up. One thing that I didn't film was that I decided to paint some of the men's trousers in greys and dark sand, just to give them even more of a ragtag feel, just like the greatcoats. The army was rushed together, so they would grab whatever they could in 1815. I also applied Agrax Earthshade from Citadel Miniatures to the figures at this stage. This wash is good as it gets into all the nooks and crannies and it helps stabilise the base colours of the figures and also adds shading. Once the Agrax had dried properly, I went back to the highlighting of the figures. In this stage I just used the original base colours and painted the raised areas, so for the flesh it was just a case of touching the raised parts of the hands and the faces. I then went back over the blue of the tunics, once again leaving the recessed areas and just hitting the raised parts where I could. It was the same with the grey. This was again for the greatcoats and some of the trousers which I had painted in grey. White was next, and I was careful here to make sure that the straps and the trousers were painted and that they stood out pretty well. I also hit the red areas once again with flat red, and although I didn't film this, I went over the pom-poms and the highlighting was finished. Although I didn't film this as well, the next thing I did was spray varnish the figures and I set them to the bases with some polystyrene cement. To finish off the command strip, I found the correct flag for the unit I had painted on the sheets of flags that are included in the box set. I used a sharp scalpel and a steel ruler to cut out the flag, folded it down the central line. Next, I painted undiluted PVA glue onto the rear of both sides, slipped it over the flagpole and pressed the two sides together very firmly. Once this was dry, I could then shape the flag as though it's blowing in the wind, and I also painted the edges of the paper to disguise the white. Finally, the last thing to do was to base the figures, and for this I used undiluted PVA glue, painted over the entire base, and then dipped into a tub of static grass. I don't use an applicator for this, as blowing on the grass before the glue has dried will make it stand up anyway. And that's it, all finished. There's a few extra bits here and there for the full battalion, such as the epaulets on the grenadiers and the voltigeurs, but this video covers most of the bulk of the painting, and as I said before, take your time, split up the painting, and you'll have an army put together in no time. I hope this video was useful. If it was, and you want to buy some of the Warlord Epic range, please use the affiliate link in the channel description below and the money earned will go back into helping the channel out. Also, please hit that subscribe button, check out my Patreon and channel memberships if you want to help out the channel further. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Storm of Steel video.